Hello everyone, my name is TARDISgirl and welcome to my channel. Today I would like to review the movie I saw this morning, Murder on the Orient Express, directed by Kenneth Branagh. Warning, this is a whodunit mystery, so if you haven't read the book and don't know the story, there will be spoilers ahead. I could punch a certain episode of Doctor Who in the face right now. 5 years early, the mystery of the Orient Express was spoiled for me and I didn't know it.
Next thing you know, you'll be telling me it's like Murder on the Orient Express, and they all did it. Murder on the Orient Express.
But brushing all that aside, while I was watching the movie, I desperately tried to forget that I already knew what the climax was going to be. And so if you take that out of the picture, it is a very, very, very enjoyable movie. One of the best I've seen throughout the year. Now, one of the reasons why I love this film so much is because I have a certain passion for things set in the 1920s and 30s. I absolutely adore movies like The Artist and The Great Gatsby, and so I was blown away by the look of this film. Everything from the settings, the buildings, and especially the costume designs. They were all very 1930s and beautifully vintage and wonderful to look at. And so for a person who loves 1920s fashion so much, this movie was just a feast for my eyes. I loved it. So, the film is directed by Kenneth Branagh, who also stars as the main character, the Belgian detective Hercule Poirot. The film has a very large cast, but it also stars Johnny Depp, Michelle Pfeiffer, Josh Gad and Daisy Ridley, to name a few. The plot of the film is that several strangers have boarded the Orient Express in Istanbul and are travelling to France, where suddenly, when they are stranded on the tracks due to a derailment, they find out that one of the passengers has been murdered, and it's up to Poirot to discover who done it. Now let's move on to the main character himself, and you can just tell that Kenneth Branagh is having the time of his life. He is sporting a beautiful French accent, he just sounds so authentic and it is wonderful to listen to him talk. Also, that is a moustache if ever I've seen one. It is just so OTT, but it's so fitting to the character. That was probably my favourite thing about Poirot, his moustache. Now, Poirot is obviously a very intelligent detective, but one of the things I found about this movie is that Branagh played him a little goofy in some places. There were several scenes where there were quite a few wisecracks about Poirot's character, but the problem is, I haven't read the original books, so I'm not really sure if this charismatic funhouse nature is a part of Poirot's original character. It's kind of hard to tell. It's given me an incentive to read the books. Also, I felt that in places the movie was trying to be a bit like Sherlock, and it was a little bit distracting when you saw the same types of gags being used again. But I do love Sherlock, and so I didn't mind too much, but it was a little bit distracting. And all the supporting cast were really, really great. I'm usually not a big fan of Johnny Depp because I've seen him in one too many Burton films, and I didn't expect to like him here because he seemed to be playing another caricature of himself. But he was actually a very interesting character this time. He played Mr. Ratchet, the murder victim, and he played a gangster character, so he managed to be incredibly sleazy and obnoxious in some places, but also very threatening in others, so it was a very well put together character, and I really liked the moments when he was on screen. Also, another standout for me was Josh Gad as Mr. McQueen, his secretary. I've only seen Josh Gad in Beauty and the Beast and Frozen, and I kind of expect him to be a comic actor, but he was very serious in this film, and his character was quite subtle and underplayed in places, so he was just fantastic in this role as Mr. McQueen. Also, I have to mention it because I am a massive fan of this actress, but Daisy Ridley was truly amazing. She had a very small part, but I felt it was very well played. She was a definitely likeable character, and I adored every second she was on screen. She had such a plummy voice and such a beautiful 20s hairstyle, and what's not to love? It's Daisy Ridley. But of course my bias is probably coming into play here. There were many other characters that really didn't have too much screen time, and so cramming all these characters into one place could get very confusing at places. And a lot of the time I wished I'd seen more of certain people. Like Olivia Colman, who played the maid, Hildegard Schmidt. I love Olivia Colman, and she was absolutely brilliant in this role, but she only had about one scene and a couple of lines. And so I couldn't help but think that she was massively underused, and I just wanted to see more of her. But there were some cases where the actors did have a very small part, but it was so well played that I didn't really mind, like Judi Dench as the princess, and also Derek Jacobi as Mr. Ratched's butler. I'm so used to hearing Derek Jacobi do a very posh voice, and so when I heard a sort of London accent come out of his mouth, I was so startled that I actually didn't mind that this character only had a tiny scene in the movie. It was just so surprising. So yes, all the parts were very well acted, but it was just such a shame that there was such a huge ensemble cast that not everyone could have as much screen time as we would like. Now the mystery aspect of this story was very well put together, and it really kept me guessing throughout the whole movie, even though I already knew the outcome. The way they put certain clues in certain scenes was very, very interesting, and by the end of it, unless you know the bigger picture, you really do have no idea who could have done it. And so while you're watching the movie, you're piecing together bits of information in your mind, and it's very, very engaging. Also, there was a great story within a story aspect of the film, which was a little bit confusing in some places, but was very, very interesting and very well interwoven into the rest of the plotline. However, the only problem is, I think there should have been a bit more of the air of tension in the film, because they're in close confines with a murderer, but it's not until about the third act of the film that we start really feeling the fear. So I do think that that aspect of the movie was a bit underplayed, because if I was in this very cramped situation, I would be very, very fearful for my life, but these guys seem pretty cool with it. But then again, I can use this as a segue to the conclusion of the movie. The ending was a lot more mature than I thought it would be. In the beginning of the movie, Poirot was doing all these visual gags about certain details and how they sort of ruled his life, a bit like Sherlock. And I was thinking that this kind of dialogue is a little bit on the nose, so I think it's going to feature quite heavily in the climax, but turned out it didn't. The actual theme of the climax was the blurring between right and wrong, because Poirot sees the world in black and white, but seeing as all the passengers on the train actually committed the crime, there's no way he can shift the blame onto one of them alone. So I thought this was a very good way of handling the story and making it a lot more serious, because Poirot really does have to battle with himself over his conclusion of seeing the world in a certain way. And it just makes the character a lot more likeable because he's seeing the world in a further spectrum of shades of grey. It's kind of a learning journey for him. So with this movie, I thought the characters were really interesting and very well acted, the story was very engaging, and the film just looked flawless. All the shots were very straight and very symmetrical, except of a certain motif of using mirrors when shooting certain characters, which I thought was another example of how they're blurring the lines in these films, which was quite symbolic now that I think about it. So now that I know Whodunnit, thank you again Doctor Who for spoiling that for me. I would highly recommend Murder on the Orient Express to anyone who likes a good murder mystery, and also for anyone who loves beautifully shot period films. I had so much fun watching this movie, and so I hope that you all do too, and that you actually manage to get to the end without guessing who the murderer/murderers are. So thank you all for watching, please subscribe to my channel if you want to see more, and I shall see you soon. Bye!